It is new set time. Edge of Eternities is coming out soon, so you know what that means. It is time to speculate which cards will be playable in Standard. So first, a few things before we hop into the list. This is going to be a video focused on mainly Standard. These are just my opinions. I'll probably miss out on some cards, so do let me know what you think down below. And the set release is on Arena the 29th. Now, for these cards, they're not in a particular order. I tried to organize them so that they're like most impactful to less impactful, but I also tried to group them a little bit in terms of what cards might see play together or in a similar archetype. So first off, just get it out of the way immediately. Obviously, the Shocklands are going to have a big impact on Standard. Rotation is coming with this set, so we're going to be losing all of the Pain lands and half the fast lands. It's very unfortunate that we're losing only half of the fast lands, so some mana or like for different color pairings is going to be way worse than others. So if you're like a Selesnya fan, for example, this is rough, this rotation. But yeah, the list down below kind of shows you what color pairings get what, so that's just something to keep an eye out for. Now, while we're on the topic of lands, we do have a cycle of mythic lands here in Edge of Eternities. I think the Esper color lands are probably going to be the most playable ones. The green one, probably also relatively playable. And the red one, I mean, I think all of these cards will see play in decks. It's a matter of what kind of impact can you expect from them. And I think these three you're going to see the most impact from. So yeah, like the blue makes a bunch of mana, black can draw you a bunch of cards, and the white can make token copies of things, which seems quite powerful as well. Now, the kind of first section here is a bit of removal. One of the best removal spells, I think, and probably one of the most played cards from the set will end up being Seam Rip. This is just portable whole as an enchantment, so you can exile anything mana value 2 or less, which is quite nice. Now, with rotation, we're losing temporary lockdown, but we have temporary lockdown at home in Pinnacle Starcage. This has the advantage or disadvantage of being an artifact instead of enchantment, and it only exiles creatures and artifacts mana value 2 or less instead of everything mana value 2 or less. It being an artifact, though, means it's going to be easier to tutor up. It's going to synergize with all the artifact cards in Standard, so should be quite a big deal. And this card, I saw it being used in the early access event, and it looked really good. It is sorcery speed removal, and by default it's going to be -2/-2, which isn't great, but it is not too challenging in the right decks to turn on that void effect, and then it's 1 mana removal anything. And often these kind of 1 mana black removal spells ask you to sacrifice a creature or sacrifice some kind of permanent. This one does not do that, and so I think this is going to be really powerful. Is it going to be played in every single deck? Probably not if you're unable to turn on void, but there are some sacrifice synergies in this set that make this way better than I think my initial impressions were. And speaking of more removal, we have Archenemy's Charm. So this is 3 mana to exile a creature or planeswalker, and then you can double Raise Dead, or you can instant speed pump something and give it lifelink. This is very similar to Gix's command, which is rotating out. It's like a baby Gix's command because it's not really a sweeper, it's targeted removal. But being able to exile a creature or planeswalker for 3 mana, as well as do those other modes, I think is going to make this card quite strong. Obviously, you need to be pretty heavily leaning into the black mana pips to be able to cast this, but regardless, I think it's going to be a strong card and see a fair amount of play. And Sunfall at home here, also probably going to see some play. Do recall, though, that some decks were dropping Sunfall for Day of Judgment just in favor of a cheaper Wrath to keep up with the speed of Standard. So I think this card will depend a bit on the speed of Standard and what threats need to be answered. But this is probably going to be the best Wrath if you want to make sure things die or are gotten rid of, because Exile Wraths are strong. Now, consult the char charts. We're moving into kind of card draw, or this is kind of a unique card draw spell that I think is going to be super strong. It's kind of a mix of Impulse, as well as there's the kind of 2-mana Golgari like card that cares about how many lands you have. But then if you kicker it, it becomes almost like a kind of memory deluge type card where you look at the top X number of cards, where X is the number of lands, and you can pick 2 of them. I think this will be a very good card for kind of controlling strategies or decks. They're going to end up with a bunch of lands and want to play at instant speed. Obviously, stock up exists in Standard, a bit more mana efficient because it's always going to look at the same number of cards, but it is sorcery speed. So now this is back on the removal train. It's a little bit different. I don't know if this card will be that good, but I think it has some potential because you can use it as kind of a cheap removal, like an Elspeth Smite, but it can also protect your creatures. So if there's kind of a market for that, I think this is kind of a unique card in the sense that it can do both of these things. Though Indestructible is not as good as Hexproof often, so maybe this card won't see any play whatsoever. Now getting into some kind of archetypes here. First one is kind of artifacts. So this is a 2-mana creature that just can be really big. I think this has potential in combination with another card here with Pinnacle Emissary. That this card also has Warp, and it's a 3-drop, so this can trigger your Synthesizer. It cares about you casting artifact spells, and you can get these 1/1 artifact tokens that can't block, but they're flying. So if you make a bunch of artifacts, you can turn up your affinity, or like active or power up your affinity cards and do things regarding that. This does care about the greatest mana value you control, but there is a affinity 5-drop, so this could be a 2-mana 5/4, which is interesting. I don't know if it will necessarily be game breaking, but we also have like the Leyline Axe, which you can have an artifact starting on the battlefield, and then you can give this double strike and trample, and it would be a 4/4 for 2. So I think there is some artifact synergies that you can go off of. But yeah, again, Pinnacle Emissary, also an interesting card because you can trigger Synthesizer multiple times with its Warp ability. And then playing into the artifacts, and kind of, this is more so like the kind of Simic Cookies style decks where you turn artifact tokens into creatures. The Synthesizer Labship can can make an artifact into a base 2/2 with flying. So if you give this flying, then you're swinging in for a bunch of damage. But yeah, it's probably one of the more interesting spacecrafts in the set. Who knows if we'll see a ton of play, but yeah. Now this is kind of a synergy card, and it actually works with quite a few different archetypes, I believe. But being an artifact that draws a card when it enters or leaves makes it work really well with the repurposing bay, where you can sacrifice this and then tutor up a synthesizer. So you play this, draw a card, sacrifice it, draw another card, tutor up your synthesizer, scry 2. It's just going to be a very nice line of play. But also this is a card that you can bounce back to your hand with your kind of pixie decks, because we still have Nurturing Pixie, and I believe the other one's called Sun Petal Kieran. So there are still cards where you can bounce things back to your hand. In that case, this will draw a card when it enters and draw a card when it leaves, and then you can replay it and draw more cards. Seems like it'll work really well in a bunch of different strategies. So just a shout out to that. And speaking of bounce strategies, I think that's probably where you're going to want to be playing this card. It's a card that when it enters, you make the opponent exile one of their cards from their hand. It costs 1 more to cast, or if it's a land, it enters tapped. So I think the best way to play this card is probably going to be bouncing it and playing it a bunch, and kind of just hosing your opponent out of playing their cards on curve and then aggro them down. Kind of the usual tempo strategy that Pixie kind of employs, where you're denying resources, making the opponent's life miserable, fits into that. And speaking of cards that might fit into these kind of tempo strategies, Hymn of the Faller, the Void mechanic, and it's important to note, it says if a permanent left the battlefield this turn, so if you bounce something back to your hand, it's going to be leaving the battlefield. So you do get the Void effect. So this can be 2 mana, surveil 1, draw 2 cards and lose 1 life for 2 mana. So that's pretty nice. And it can work with that, or it can work with your sacrifice strategies, or just generic strategies where you're turning on Void. So this might just be kind of a role player card in decks that need this kind of cheap card draw. Alright, Cosmogrand Zenith. Cares about you casting your second spell, can make tokens. This might be good in the Pixie decks, because you're bouncing things, playing things, and can help provide aggro that way, or a win con that way. So not exactly sure where else this card will see play, or could see play, but yeah, has potential. It reminds me of Monastery Mentor. Monastery Mentor did not see a ton of play when it was in Standard, so I'm a little bit hesitant on this card, but yeah. Alright, this card is kind of busted for an uncommon. It's a 2 mana 2/2 with haste, and then you can warp it from your graveyard. You warp for 1 mana and pay 2 life. So another way of looking at this, you can warp it for 1 mana, pay 2 life, swing in with this hasty 2/1, and do that again for 2 mana. And if you sacrifice this, you can always warp it out of your graveyard again, so it works well in sacrifice strategies. I think it's going to work really well in mono black aggro, like generically, because you also have Cecil, which cares about you losing life, or reducing your life total. So play this, you play your Bitter Triumphs, you flip your Cecils and go off, I guess. I don't know. But overall, really strong when you have these cards that can come out of the graveyard repeatedly. Works with a bunch of different things, and just a really annoying, resilient threat to deal with. So prepare your seam rips for this guy. And speaking of sacrifice, this is probably one of the most busted sacrifice outlets I've seen in Standard. 2 mana 3/2, sacrifice a creature or artifact, surveil 1. So when you're surveilling, you can put things in your graveyard, and you can get those things back with like Raise the Past or other things. Just really, really strong. Surveil is probably better than, well, is better than Scry, I would probably say. And yeah, I don't know what to say. Sacrifice. And speaking of sacrifice, Sir Vondam, I think, is going to work well in sacrifice strategies, because you can use it as removal. I think is the kind of strong part. It grows, gains you life, and then you can sacrifice it later on if you need to get rid of something, because if its power is 4 or greater, you can destroy target non-land permanent. So sacrifice got more toys. Yippee, Sephiroth. Alright, while we're on the sacrifice topic, I want to talk about Sothera. I didn't really think this card was going to be necessarily a super standard card, but I was probably going to lean more towards Commander. But I did see some games with it in early access, where if you're playing it with like a sacrifice strategy, you can kind of 2-for-1 your opponent, because you play it, you sacrifice a bunch of things, they remove their entire board, and then you get one of their creatures back onto the battlefield. So could be a really strong line of play. I'm not very sure, but just wanted to shout that out. And another card that's worth a shout out, because it works with Oculus and strategies that want you to grab back your sacrificed creatures, is Scout for Survivors. Return total mana value, or return up to 3 creatures with total mana value 3 or less. It also pumps them, so yeah, seems pretty strong. And since we're going to be losing Recommission, maybe this is a substitute for your Oculus decks. And then 0 Point Ballad. This is a card that seems like it's kind of a flexible sweeper for black. I don't know if it's that great because you're going to be losing life, but I guess if you have Cecil, maybe it's okay. But if you're sweeping the board, you're probably sweeping your other creatures, but maybe you don't care because you have those, where is it? Timeline colors that you can warp back from the graveyard. I don't know, but I like that this gives you a little bit more sweeper options in terms of black outside of I wait to 5 mana and I cast Deadly Cover Up or something. Okay, maybe I don't like it. I gotta be cautious saying that because if they sweep my board, I'll be sad, but it's probably a good thing to help round out the options. All right, Devastating Onslaught. I don't think this card is particularly like good, but I think if you're a Doppelgang enjoyer, you're gonna love this card. It's a double expel, make a bunch of token copies of things, give them haste. It works really well with the red Overlord because it enters, does the thing, attacks, does the thing. So you can do insane damage and just one-shot your opponent if you're ramping and playing Devastating Onslaught. Melded Moxite. I think this is going to be a role player card for artifact decks. It works well with things like Lich Knight's Conquest. You just play the card, you draw, discard, or discard, draw, and then later on you just sacrifice as fodder for something. So I think it's not exciting necessarily, but it's gonna do the thing, and it's artifact, which is like an important factor of that because there's a lot of artifact synergies that are being introduced in the set and exist in standard at the moment. Speaking of artifact synergies, weapons manufacturing. Whenever a non-token artifact you control enters, you make this artifact token that if you sacrifice, or if it leaves the battlefield for any reason, you do 2 damage to any target. So here's a huge artifact, or like engine. I think this is going to be more of like an engine card for a deck where you want to build around this card. I'm excited to try this card out in like maybe a Rakdos artifact deck where you can play like Pitiless Plunderer. I think that's the name of the card. Or no, it's Pitiless Carnage. I think it's the name of the card. Where you sacrifice a bunch of things and draw that many cards. So you sacrifice all your munition tokens, do a bunch of damage, and draw a bunch of cards. But yeah, super exciting card. And I saw a lot of it in the early access content that I was watching. All right, this is Spacecraft Springbloom Druid. But if you have a lander, you can just instead sacrifice a lander. So it could be 3 mana ramp 2 if you can get a lander in your first 2 turns. There's only like 3 cards that can really do it, and 2 of them are 2 color cards, and the other one we're going to be talking about coming up. So not entirely sure this card is going to be that impactful, but the fact that it does something that Springbloom Druid does, and Springbloom Druid sees play in standard at the moment, I think is sort of relevant, because maybe the fact that it's an artifact instead could be relevant in certain decks or strategies. All right. Next one is another land related card, is Eusocial Engineering. I'm not usually excited about these 5 mana like make a token on 2/2 token on landfall cards that seem to get printed every once in a while. But I think the strength of this one is you can warp it in for 2 mana. So if you have like a fetch land and you have Traveling Chocobo, you crack that fetch land and you end up with 4 robot, or like 4 2/2s. If you have one of the other cards we're going to be talking about, which is Icetill Explorer, you can also make a bunch of robots for just 2 mana and a fetch land. So I think this card, I don't ever really want to cast it for 5 mana, but that warp 2 might make it worth it because 2 mana make like 4 2/2s, I think is good value. Make 2 2/2s is okay. But 2 mana make 4/2/2s, I think, is where this card might actually start being relevant. All right, another card for the green landfall. Well, the other card was less for the green landfall deck that exists in standard at the moment. I think that would be more of its own shell, but this card I think slots right into the green landfall aggro deck that exists in standard, because you warp this out for 3 mana, you get another power doubling effect, and you just try and do the one shot your opponent plan where you're just aggroing them down as fast as humanly possible. And I guess will be a pretty good commander card. Now, speaking of ridiculous landfall cards, this card is like generically good. It will absolutely be a staple in Commander, but in Standard, I think this card also can just be played for value. If you're trying to ramp and you have like Fabled Passage in your deck, you're gonna love this card, because as long as it sticks around for like 2 turns, you've ramped 2 cards. If it sticks around longer, you're just continuously ramping. You're putting cards into your graveyard, and so with that, it could enhance like any sort of graveyard deck synergies. So I think this card's insanely strong. I originally was thinking of it more as a commander card, but when I saw it played, it looked like ridiculously good, even in standard. So I will be keeping my eye out for Icetill Explorer. All right, next is Anticausal Vestige. This card, so another warp card. I think this card might see play in particular in kind of colorless ramp decks or mono green ramp decks, because you can warp this in, you can crew your World Wagon, I think is the name of the card, attack in, ramp another card, and then when this leaves, maybe you put a Overlord into play. I saw that happen. It was pretty gross. So yeah, this card I think is going to work really well in colorless decks with Ugin, or maybe mono green ramp decks where you can get a bunch of lands onto the battlefield, and then when this leaves after warping, you put something big into the battlefield, and then you can cast this again. So yeah, I also think these kind of big creatures with warp might synergize well with some of other green cards, where you have Outcast or Trailblazer, which sees a creature with big power enter, it will draw you a card. So I think there is potential for this card, but it's probably going to be mostly in ramp decks and green decks. All right, this card, I wrote this card off originally, but it did a few things in early access. I didn't get to play any early access, but the creators that I saw play, there was this, it looked so jank, but there was this deck where they would play this Mite. They would pump spell the Mite would then pump another creature when you go to attack, and it just did so much damage. Technically, I believe there is a way of turn 2 killing with this Mite and the red ley line. If you get like 2 of these Mites and the red ley line, you can like turn 2 kill. But yeah, I think this card is strong suit is going to be putting pump spells on it, and then it sharing the pump spells with something else. Very similar to the red ley line that got banned out of Best of 1 standard for doubling up pump spells. So I originally was sleeping on this card, but maybe some super aggro decks can make use of it. Now this card, I was also not much of a believer in, but maybe it's all right. I saw some games where it did well in early access, but this card, I think of it almost as a kind of mono green Baneslayer Angel or like Shieldred. If it sticks on the battlefield, it will take over the game, win you the game, but the challenge is making that happen. And I don't particularly like that this has 3 toughness, because you get lightning striked or you get nowhere to run very easily. So maybe it will see play, maybe not. Here's another kind of green aggro card, which is funny. is a 2 mana 1/3, can turn something into a 3/3 when a land enters, or if you have 6 lands, turn it into a 6/6. So I just think that 2 mana 3/3 with flying basically seems pretty good, and probably could be abusable with stuff like the Mite, or other like synergies. Whoops, went too far. All right, next card. This card is probably not going to see a ton of play as it stands currently, but I think it has a lot of potential. Because it's a 1 mana enchantment that basically makes one of your creatures fight another creature, and it pumps up your creature, makes it harder to block. Part of the thing that makes this card good is any kind of like auras, boggles type synergy, where there was a Selesnyan deck that kind of was doing this in standard. And then also this is a fetchable card with the Gear Hulk, and so you can just cure this up as removal, which also seems quite strong. But as we were talking about with the shock lands, Selesnya kind of got hosed in the land department, so probably not going to be very good. And so for that reason, this card's probably going to be a little bit restricted because of that. This card, I think, is an interesting card for the, where was it? Larval Scoutlander, because it's a 1 mana card that you can play on turn 1. Usually you're not doing too much on turn 1, especially if you're a ramp deck. So you play this, gain a little bit of life, make a lander token, and then if you have the scout ship or whatever the heck it was called, I already forgot it, you can sacrifice that lander and then ramp 2 for 3 mana, which doesn't seem bad. But also, I think this card's probably a lot better than people think for just 1 mana, because you play this turn 1, you're not usually doing too much on turn 1. Maybe you would play a tap land instead, or a Llanowar Elves, but you play this turn 1, and then turn 2 you crack the lander token, which is very similar to, like, you know, Rampant Growth or Glimpse the Core. We do have Glimpse the Core in standard currently, so maybe if you pair this with Glimpse the Core, that's a good kind of like 2 mana ramp package, and then you can slam a 4-drop more consistently on turn 3. So I don't know. I just think that I'm gonna definitely be trying this card and seeing if it's actually that bad. And then Seedship Broodtender. I think this might be the last card here. It's 2 mana, mill 3, and then you can sacrifice it for 5 to return a creature or spacecraft. Just seems like a good role player card for any Golgari graveyard deck, because it's going to fill your graveyard, and then in a pinch you can pay 5 and reanimate. So seems really good for those reasons. And yeah, that is all the cards. Let me know if I missed any. Let me know what card is your favorite from Edge of Eternities. What would be mine? I'd have to think. It might be... Sorry, I'm thinking. Actually, I don't know if it's on the list. Actually, you know what? It's definitely Devastating Onslaught, because it's just kind of funny. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff helps out the channel a ton. Check out the videos for 5 good things about Edge of Eternities and 5 bad things about Edge of Eternities if you're interested. And have a nice morning, evening, night, afternoon, wherever and whenever you're watching. Take care of yourself. Ciao.